And if someone wants to demonstrate how to put your name and where you're calling in from, Billy Spitzer, I'm going to call on you to be our model. Hello, everybody. We'll get started in just a few minutes as people are coming in. Eagle Bluff, Pittsburgh, Amherst. I love seeing all the places. Kent, Ohio, and Cleveland. Excellent. Florida and Idaho. Great. Just keep joining. So happy you could all be here. It's going to be a great session. And it's snowing in Denver. Snowy in Denver. And Brianna, good to see you again. And happy Chinese New Year to anybody celebrating starting, I think it's February 1st. Lunar New Year. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Still people are joining. Welcome, welcome. Hi, Carol from New Hampshire. I think the East Coast and Northeast is going to get hit with snow this weekend, potentially. A nor'easter is coming. Snowy Canada. So many people from across the country. It's so great to see all of you and across North America. And I bet we're going to have some international folks as well. And I know a lot of people, when the timing is off, will listen to the recording later. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody to the webinar. We're so excited you could join us today. And we're so lucky to have the EcoRise team with us today to talk about their journey from environmental education to environmental justice. And we'll hear much more about that. I'm the Executive Director of NAAE. If I don't know you, my name is Judy Browse, and I truly am excited for everybody that's joining today because we're going to learn so much from this team, and you'll get a chance to meet them in just a minute. And we've had the great pleasure to work with EcoRise and looking forward to everything that they are sharing. Some really wonderful information and ideas and materials that all of us can use. And this is how we all learn. It's so important. And I do want to mention that equity and inclusion, justice, and all of this work is so important to NAAE internally, externally, to our network and beyond in terms of trying to influence society. And we also have a number of resources. And one of the best things about these webinars is that in the chat, you can share resources and ideas that everybody can use. And we will be sharing the chat afterward. And it's really important that you include as much as you can in terms of resources, because that's one of the big benefits of these webinars. So we are also doing a lot, and it is so critical that we learn from each other and keep moving this work forward. And that's what we're going to hear about today. And these webinars are all about bringing new ideas, insights, new thinking to the field and beyond. And we're so excited to be working with our partners at the U.S. Forest Service. This is one of our EE Inspire webinars, which is all about sparking innovation and ideas in environmental education. And we couldn't be luckier than working with Heidi McAllister as the Assistant Director of the Conservation Education at the Forest Service. Heidi is a leader in environmental ed for years, has worked internationally, former Peace Corps volunteer in Paraguay, has done so much. And Heidi, if you want to say just a few words, but welcome to the webinar.
Well, thanks, Judy, and welcome everybody. We're so happy that you're here and can share this with us. As we were talking with NAAE, a longtime partner of the Forest Service, we were talking about how we could bring high quality national level professional development to our Forest Service field staff who are in all across the country and in some very rural areas. And we hit upon the idea of a webinar series, and we thought, let's call it EE Inspire. inspire. And we take a look at the logo that we have, because we love that, because it shows the spark, as Judy said, that we are that we're trying to create in everybody's thinking with bringing new ideas and things like that. So hopefully you will get some sparks from this webinar. I know we have a wonderful panel set up for you, and they will be sparking away in just a minute. So I hope you all enjoy it and get a bunch out of it. So thank you so much, and a big thank you to NAAEE as well.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you so much for all you do. We love this partnership, and we're all trying to work together to get the word out on all the good things that we're doing. And I want to thank our affiliate co-hosts who help support all the webinars. And let me just mention that all the webinars are archived. We've done a number on JEDI work, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and they are all on the website. And thanks to all our affiliates for all you do to move the discussion forward on JEDI and environmental education. And also a thank you to E360 and EPA and the work and support that they give us to actually archive things and have JEDI discussion groups and all that good stuff. And of course, we are on Zoom. Everyone is on mute, so you can't speak up, but you really can communicate through the chat. And again, you will get a copy of this recording, you'll get a copy of the chat, and you'll get a copy of the PDF of the PowerPoint from EcoRise, which is really exciting. And we want to thank our captioner, Marcia, who is helping to make sure that this info is accessible to everyone who needs help with the audio. So that's another benefit. And thank you, Marcia, for doing that. We know it's a lot of work. And now the best part of the whole webinar is turning it over to the EcoRise team. And Abby, I'm going to turn it over to you to take us forward. Thank you all, and they will introduce themselves. Thanks, Abby.
Actually, Zakia, you want to kick it off for us? You're on mute, Zakia.
Thank you. I want to welcome everyone. We have a wonderful talk about the work that we're doing here at EcoRise. And before we jump into the journey that our organization has taken into DEI work and environmental justice, and talking about the environmental justice curriculum, we're going to start off with some of our own personal journeys into this work. And so I'll go first. My name is Zakia Grant. I'm a program manager at EcoRise, based in New York. And I support a lot of different regions throughout the U.S. New York, my home base, of course, New Jersey, Georgia, and Massachusetts. And so there's a lot of different work that goes on in a lot of those regions. But to explain how I got to this point, I have to go way back, and I'll try to shorten my EJ journey and DEI journey quite a bit. But it started off, I was introduced to the idea of environmental justice in graduate school. I had decided early on, based on my exposure as a child through my parents, to the natural world, that this is something that I wanted to do as a career. And so as I advanced in my my work, I came across reading the book Dumping in Dixie by Robert Bullard. And I was always a believer of science being used for good. And here I saw that the science was being ignored in favor of racism. In citing some of these landfills, I was taking classes about groundwater and pollution and what things we shouldn't be doing as scientists. And here we go with this scientific information out there, still impacting people of color in disproportionate ways. And so that's where my environmental justice journey began, because then I started looking at my own neighborhood. I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood in the outskirts of New York City, and I started thinking about the things that I have, like a landfill, which is still there, industrial parks, truck traffic, and all the things that I didn't see in neighboring towns. And so it really kind of put things together. Now, as far as DEI work or equity work, I've always been the only one in my schoolwork. So going through school, studying geology, I've always been the only person of color in my programs. And even when I went into, finally got into work, I was the only one. So I wanted to make sure that not only are we focusing on making sure folks are not being disproportionately affected by environmental conditions, but people that look like me and other brown and people of color folks also are exposed to these career fields, because I felt that if there was a place where we're at, maybe some of these things that these environmental injustices wouldn't occur. So there's the two ends of the spectrum of how I've gotten to this place. And I'll pass it over to my colleague, Kizzy.
Thanks, Zakia. Hey, y'all, it's really great to be here. My name is Kizzy Hannibal Zolani, and I am based in Austin, Texas. And I'm a co-founder of EcoRise. I've been here from the start, played various roles over the last 12, 13 years, but currently I am managing our programming in Washington, DC, and also in California, which is where I'm from. And I also support our youth program initiatives. We have some youth climate justice programs that happen year round that I help out with, and our environmental justice initiatives. And I'm really grateful to be here this evening. So I think that, to really sort of, we work on sort of tracing our story and our entrance point. And mine, like Zakia, goes back to my childhood being raised in the food belt of California, right near Watsonville, in the 70s and 80s, when there was high introduction of pesticide use on all on the agricultural crops there. I remember being sprayed by crop dusters. And I was sort of like the citizen. Of course, we have the farm workers that have the highest, exposure and health risks and adverse health effects because they're day in, day out in the pesticide fields. But then there were citizens like myself that got extremely sick. So I actually got very, very sick at a young age, and have spent a big portion of my life like learning how to heal my gut and heal myself from exposure to pesticides and chemicals from the food industry. And as on top of that, my mother was extremely involved in the United Farm Workers movement and a supporter of Cesar Chavez and marched with him. And so there was an element in my childhood of being very aware, even though not knowing the languaging of that environmental justice element of the big ag, big food, chemical industry, and the effects that it has on people and how that trickles down. And then flashing forward into college, I got really involved in a little bit of more race equity work, there was a group of us students that took the admin and admissions group at college to task, because it was such a homogenous kind of student body, and really kind of pushed for a shift in what was going on with our campus and who was having access to this higher education. And then moving forward in EcoRise, being there, it's been interesting to see the transition. And I was part of creating equity as one of our organizational values, and realizing how just that simple, kind of when we go back and trace our story, the simple change of really harnessing that this is a value of ours really kind of slowly started, integrating and pushing like a wave of systemic change in the org. Also just being really deeply involved with my husband and other work that we've done. I did a lot of anti-racist work with my husband in different settings, especially with youth leadership and community action. And then also really with the arrival of Abby, to be honest with you, there was a shared commitment to anti-racist work then within the organization that we really shared. And it really helped us move things more rapidly in regards to kind of prioritizing and promoting certain things to happen. And here we are today. So it's great to be here. I'm going to shift it over to you, Abby.
Thanks, Kizzy. Hi, everybody. Very weird not to see your faces. My name's Abby Randall. I've been with EcoRise for about 6 years. I'm a former middle and high school science teacher. And I think the quick anecdote I'd like to share from my own race equity journey actually relates to NAAEE. I had the great privilege in 2018 to be an NAAEE, a lot of E's, 360 fellow. And we convened for a week in Virginia, working on community action projects, my project was focused on the EcoRise Ambassador Program, which uplifts and trains and supports emotionally, socially, professionally, financially, teacher leaders across the country to move this work forward. And at the time, I had a real awareness that these teacher leaders lacked diversity, lacked racial diversity, lacked geographic diversity. And so I've been really focused on diversifying that program. And I was sharing this with a group at the time. We were workshopping our projects and getting feedback. And I think a little proudly, honestly, I was sharing how much we'd increased the racial diversity of this group in just a year. And the group held a mirror up to me and said, how is that group of teachers going to feel when they come to Austin and have your all white staff and your mostly white board there with them? What's that going to feel like? And that was a real shift for me, and thinking beyond representation and diversity and thinking about equity and inclusion and justice. And I'll pick that story back up in just a moment here. So quickly, what we hope to do with you today, we want to share the journey we've been on and that we're still on, some of the best practices and challenges that we've encountered as we work towards becoming an anti-racist organization. And we're certainly going to share some of those best practices and resources with you, but we really wanted to spend some time talking about the challenges and some of the learnings and ongoing challenges that we're facing, because I think as a community, we're all on this journey together. And then we'll certainly share some of our environmental justice curriculum and resources with you and talk about how that relates to this equity journey that we're on. Very quickly, we are a nonprofit social enterprise organization. We've been around 12, 13 years, based out of Austin, Texas. We now serve thousands of teachers across the country, from Sacramento, California, down to the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, all the way over to the East Coast in DC, New York, and Boston. And we've had a shift. We've just published a new strategic plan, and this is our new, fresh off the press, new mission and vision, where we are really moving from environmental education to shift towards talking about justice and power structure and resource allocation, and focusing on providing youth with the tools and experiences they need to carry that work forward and achieve justice. So we could probably do a webinar on each of these phases of our journey. We're going to go quickly so we can get into the environmental justice curriculum portion, and give some really meaty examples to think through. But to pick back up off that story I was just telling you, when I got back from that conference, with the EE360 conference, as Kizzy was saying, we got together and as an organization, we paused our hiring. We redesigned all of our approaches to hiring, from the way that we talk about job descriptions to the networks that we circulate these jobs in, to the way we ask interview questions and assess candidates, who's on our hiring committee. We redesigned everything until we were able to get the pool of candidates that we were looking for to move this work forward. And the same thing happened on the board side in terms of board selection a little bit later, but certainly in a transformative way. We also formed an equity working group that has guided and has changed over time, made up of both white and BIPOC staff in our organization at multiple levels of leadership, and formed affinity groups so that our white staff can do this work together, and that our BIPOC staff have a place to connect about the challenges that they're facing, and the work that's being done. And we've reimagined the way that we budget for equity work. You have to allocate resources to do this work. It doesn't just happen magically. And the way that we talk to our funders, and we fundraise and interact with our partners as it relates to equity and justice. Kizzy, I've been talking a lot. Do you want to pick up the rest of our journey for me?
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, establishing that we prioritize budget and money for things, we really wanted to have like initial momentum of a lot of internal professional development opportunities and budgeting for individual opportunities. We were promoting Undoing Racism, and people kind of making sure that they could get into that workshop and had paid time off to do it. We budgeted for a third-party consultant to come in and to facilitate a 2-part staff workshop, in-person workshop, that really spanned over 6 months, and that was intentional. And that led to a really pivotal kind of cornerstone for us, which was some community agreements. We also had, for the Equity Working Group, determined that we wanted 1 staff meeting a month where we had at least an hour, if not an hour and a half, to lead deep dives, whether it was workshops or readings or visioning or strategy stuff. And so we kept that momentum going. And then, you know, once things kind of got forced into a virtual setting, we had to kind of get creative on figuring out what are different things that we can do to keep this going. And we started plugging into Equity in the Center workshops. We started plugging into the Undoing Racism workshops once they became virtual, and have just established that it's a complete priority. Everybody has the ability to block off their schedule whenever there's something that comes up that they want to do this, and it's really supported and encouraged, highly encouraged. And then kind of, you know, that was sort of, this is definitely sequential. We tried to kind of like show you guys sequential. And so, you know, the pandemic has come and the world has shut down, and we were able to, in this pause of the everyday, there's a window that opened for us to develop our environmental justice curriculum and really dive into the collaboration and the creation of this, which then also led to the professional development piece of our environmental justice curriculum. And, you know, this was really a long haul project that illuminated a lot for us internally, allowed us to kind of create a standard of integrity in regards to extending deadlines to do things properly, to have the space to confront the things that arise and to really not rush things, and take the proper time and space to make sure that the proper input and decision making and collaborative thinking and really processing was happening. So that was a very important part. And then, you know, most currently we have developed a youth program arm, which we've got a couple, both in San Antonio and in Austin. We have a school year-round 9-month-long program with the Youth Council that leads to paid internship programs. So we have, I want to say, 3 to 4 different internship programs, and we really value a living wage. And so these interns get paid very fairly, and it's a workforce development experience for them, and you know, where we hook them up with career exposure and mentors. And there's also been a wonderful speaker series within that programming promoting intergenerational wisdom and wisdom sharing and community action. So, you know, this is a timeline. This is a really basic, you know, iteration of our timeline. And these are some strategies that we've been successfully employing and have built upon themselves. But all of these come with significant challenges and opportunities to identify our blind spots and make more integrated organizational wide change. And so we wanted to kind of dive a little bit more into that. So I'm going to pass it on to Zakia and Abby to talk about the next.
Thank you, Kizzy. And so, you know, talking about those steps and those challenges in this journey, the murder of George Floyd, you know, obviously came at a time where the world was pretty stressed. And, you know, one of the things that came, you know, out of the pandemic, before we even get into the next step, was that people of color were stressed beyond normal circumstances. And so when this horrific murder happened, it really, you know, opened up a flood of emotions. And so I was glad that that EcoRise allowed the staff in general, especially staff of color, to open up about, you know, how they felt and kind of vent a little bit. And then what surprised me is that we said that we were going to do something, we're going to make a statement. And so in my past experience with other organizations, I was like, wow, they're really going to do something. And so, we embarked on that journey. And so we came up with that we were going to write a statement. And so from the meetings, there were things that are put into the statement. And I had, someone had put in something that I had mentioned in that, very open venting period. And then I'm looking at the draft and someone's like, do we really need this statement? And, the statement was basically about how, Black people have been, been under duress with these types of situations of police brutality, other types of discrimination for centuries. And I thought that was a very important thing to include because that was how I was feeling at the moment. That was part of my voice. And so seeing those words, I'm thinking that this is going to be a great open process. It really showed that we really still needed to do some work. Luckily, I had a ton of allies, that supported me and said, yes, this thing needs to stay in. But it really just shed the light that, even for all our openness and venting, that we still needed to do some work if we're, saying that we're going to be an anti-racist organization and thinking about, continuing into this DEI work. And so there's a lot of different things that came out of this. And I'm going to, Abby, if you want to talk a little bit about how it was for the board on the board perspective. And
thanks for sharing that, Zakia. Yeah, I think this was another really pivotal moment for us, and especially on the board. Our board, like her staff, had been predominantly white and really lacked an important set of perspectives in this moment. And there was a disconnect and some blind spots for some folks about why racial justice was relevant in the space of environmental education. And as Zakia mentioned, that it led to sort of a question about whether we're going to center these voices in this statement. And so that led to a massive transformation on our board. It caused a completely new approach to the way that we kind of do outreach and select board members, and to the approach that's taken from professional development and just culture building on the board, which was really rooted in this moment. Kizzy, should we move into some environmental justice curriculum?
Yep, that sounds great. So, just to give you, we were really excited to share this resource because, it's one of our latest offerings, and the work that we've done has led for it to be created. And just to give you a little back history, there was a long time desire for us to create this, like I'm talking 4 or 5 years before we really got the opportunity to do this. And there was a lack of time. And, a lot of it really kind of stemmed from a hunger for a little bit more frank conversations that go beyond the kind of typical whitewashed environmental education topics of recycling and solar and school gardens and soil composition, to that really unaddressed element of power and justice and resource allocations and true impact on communities. And so we were very excited to have the opportunity to kind of really dive into that and be frank in what we were doing. So we knew it's a really big subject, and this is really the tip of the iceberg. But so we intentionally created the Introduction to Environmental Justice curriculum. And, it kind of is, it was a big challenge because it's a pre-K through 12 curriculum. And so we needed to really have something that of value for 4-year-olds, to people teaching 4-year-olds and for 18-year-olds. And we wanted it to kind of build on itself and be, have some differentiation available for teachers teaching a spectrum of children. And so really realizing where are these little humans at ages 4 through 6 through 7 versus, middle school versus high school. We really dove into elementary, kind of addressing actions and behaviors and role models. What is going on in your little social environment in your classroom? How does it relate to what's going on in your community and your neighborhood? And then diving a little bit deeper into middle school, talking a little bit of more like knowledge building and history and timeline, and understanding a little bit more of the really important concepts and tenets of environmental justice, but really also addressing resource allocation and how systemically that has been, engineered. And then what does community action look like? And who's doing the community action, and how do we kind of come together and organize? And then the high school is all of that included, plus diving a little bit deeper into town hall scenarios. How do you advocate? How do you get in there? What happens? Where do change and policy levels happen? And having students really play out different important contrasting but complicated roles and scenarios that would typically come up in a town hall meeting with environmental justice topics, and then really having them have an opportunity to dive into policy writing and regulation kind of evaluation. So, so it's a beautiful curriculum. Everybody has access to it. We're going to make sure you get the link to download the curriculum. But once it was published, we realized that now it's time to focus on our professional development. And what does that look like? How do we build that out? And we swiftly realized that if we have people in a live workshop, we need to prioritize preparing people's mindsets and the posture in which you approach this work and participate in the conversation. It was like the number one non-negotiable. And Zakia, I'd love to hear you kind of share a little bit more about our development and realization of making this a priority.
Sure, Kizzy. I mean, as we develop these lessons, there is multiple parts, and there's lots of different things that come into play. And it's not just putting together wonderful graphics and worksheets. We wanted to make sure that educators really understood what environmental justice was and where they fit into teaching environmental justice before they bring it to their students. And so really having them take a look at who they were, and what work have they done or not have done in environmental justice. What are their experiences? So that's the first thing. So that they have a clear understanding of what their role is before they even bring it to a separate audience. And then as they, delve more into the idea of preparing their mindset, just thinking about how do they get to know their students, who is in their classroom or whatever environment that they're working with students. How would they be impacted by environmental justice? Are they students that have no impact at all, or believe they have no impact, or are there students that are severely impacted? How do you have that fine line of, if they're severely impacted, that you're not victimizing your audience and saying that, oh, the neighborhood that you live in is bad, and what are you going to do about it? But this idea of again finding that balance, but really about knowing your students. You have to know your students in order to find that balance. We also wanted to make sure that we're not just presenting one side of environmental justice. We know that many regions rely on certain industries as their source of economic power. So how do you talk to students whose parents may be involved in some of those things that may have an unjust environmental impact without saying, your family is a terrible family because they're involved in this, even though that's what puts food on the table. And so really just trying to do that delicate, that delicate dance around all of those factors before you put something in front of a student and say, hey, learn about this. And so I'm going to pass it over to Kizzy. And Kizzy, can you talk about some of the other perspectives in preparing your mindset section for teachers that are not of color?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as Zakia and I kind of continued developing these professional development experiences, it became very clear that race equity is huge, and it needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed frankly and explicitly, and really just wanting to identify and communicate directly with any of our white educators, and making sure that, you know, we are aware of our position of power between us and our students and our community. And, you know, the potential for creating curricular trauma if these kind of things that Zakiya just spoke about aren't really truly considered and really reflected upon and integrated. And, you know, and that is deep personal work that needs to happen in a long-term commitment, and not just a passing phase or a passing trend or something that's performative that can kind of lean into white saviorism, but just that deep, frank conversation, sticking through the discomfort and calling things what they are, and having allies and collaborators that you can help support each other with. And so we just really make sure that that's a part of it, you know, and that we're able to just address it and support people. And so just like this is a deep work that we are expecting the teachers that come to our workshops to do, it is the work that our organization has had to do in creating this content. And so we wanted to pull back the curtain a little bit on some of the instances during the creation of this environmental justice curriculum to give you a better understanding of our process and highlight some specific instances where we really had to dig into the discomfort and address issues internally. So with that, Zakiya, would you be willing to talk about our elementary cards? Yeah.
Thank you. Sure. So definitely, we've had wonderful graphics, in the past, and a wonderful artist that completed a lot of the graphics for our EcoRise curricula in the past. And so when we wanted to embark on this environmental justice lesson journey, we quickly found out that some of the artists that we had worked with before were not equipped to draw certain things, such as people of color, Black and brown people. And so we definitely had to shift gears very quickly to find someone who could. And so there's that challenge, of thinking that we can get things done very quickly with what resources we had, and not accounting for, well, we have to search for, people that are able to do certain things because they have that talent. And then the other part came to paying people for that. So, there were things thrown out of like, we can get a student intern to do it, for, a low price, because we did have a low budget, because that's what we normally pay, or that's, what the plan was, and not realizing that, if you want to reach out to talent that has a specific skill that you want, then we should be able to pay professional people to get the things that we want. And so the idea that, we had to up our budget so that we can pay professional people of color to give us a good product, and not kind of like, lowball them, if there's equity in work, and equity in offering people the proper wages for the work and the talent that they have. And so that really kind of opened our eyes, and it was something we were not expecting, and that's just for writing the curriculum. And there was a couple of more challenges. It really kind of illuminated, the work, the emotional aspect of this work that we were doing, putting together these lessons. And I'm going to, Kizzy, if you could talk a little bit more about, some of the other opportunities where we had a, shift in enlightenment on where we needed to improve, that'd be great.
Yeah. Abby, will you go back to that slide though, just for a second, just so y'all know that these are some discussion cards for our lower elementary students, for teachers to kind of be able to have a visual to talk about all sorts of different prompts with each of these cards. I did see a question come in about, are these attached to real life situations? They are, not necessarily like this is in Brooklyn and 1970 whatever, but this is the community rec center that got bulldozed for a factory plant to get put in, or this is the Casa Verde project where people are building up houses for others. So there's a set of 12 cards that really help promote some deeper dialogue and discussion for our younger learners, to understand like maybe the broader picture of some systemic issues. So thank you. So building on the heels of that, we did that was our kind of like our big artistic piece for the younger grades. And then we were investing in these beautiful environmental justice heroes posters, which this is for middle school. Actually, this is for all the age groups. We really wanted to highlight the heroes, the people who have dedicated their careers and lives to doing this work, to being the community leaders and the community heroes, and knowing that representation matters, and that inspiration is a very crucial element to sustaining this very hard work that more often than not seems indomitable. You know, there's a doom and gloom to the reality of the depth and the insidiousness of some of these systems of oppression and pollution and, you know, adverse community health. And so we dove into this project, and there's a team of us, and we identified 25 leaders, and then our budget, we're like, all right, let's go down. We can do 15. Okay, we can do 10, 12, you know. And so we were trying to see how many we could do. And we had our list, and we were kind of moving forward. And there were some people and some perspectives on our team that when they were reviewing the poster series that we had planned out and mapped out and started to produce, there was a kind of resistance to highlighting Tyrone Hayes, who is the man holding the frog in this little picture here, because of the experience of what happened to him when he informed and educated his community. And so a little backstory, he was a brilliant, you know, mind at UC Berkeley. He was a professor, maybe adjunct, but anyways, he was a huge scientist on the heels of basically discovering a herbicide chemical called atrazine that was extremely harmful, and what it did to frogs and fish, and how potentially dangerous it was as it was turning up into our water system. And its maker, Syngenta, which is a very huge, the classic like corporation versus the people, Syngenta pursued him because he was basically revealing the toxic effects of their big cash crop. And it kind of turned into a classic, like him getting harassed and for poking the beast sort of thing. And it was extremely stressful, and a lot of like mental health, you know, kind of challenges come up when you have some big corporation coming after you. And a long stressful battle ensued. And, you know, there was some issues around the way that Tyrone Hayes, like Syngenta, tried to really like come at him for some of the ways that he responded in jest, to kind of push back against the way that they were the tactics, the really stressful tactics that they were putting against him. And because of all this, the poster wasn't approved because of this perceived controversy. And this became a big conflict specifically between the three of us, between Abby and Zakia and me, with me and Zakia really pushing for him to stay included. We were very informed and aware of the whole story and what the perceived controversy was, and really adamant that he is a community hero and he absolutely is worthy of being included in this series. And, you know, I'm going to kind of let Abby sort of explain from her experience what came up from all of this.
Thanks, Kizzy. So this is another example of one of those pivotal transformative moments, and having to stop and look at the way we've been doing things historically, and is that the way we want to continue doing things moving forward as we have a lens of equity and justice. And so initially I was kind of deferring to voices in our organization, white voices, that were upholding this way of wanting to be, you know, palatable to the largest audience possible, and being kind of in that white supremacy culture characteristic of being conflict avoidant. And if I'm being honest, I think catering to a largely white audience, not intentionally, but I think if I look backwards, that is who our audience was at the time. And so it was a real shift for me to you know, Kizzy and Zakia spoke up, and I had to examine, why am I not valuing and centering their perspectives? They're the experts. They've been invested and immersed in this curriculum. They've done all the research. They know the teachers that are going to be using this. You know, why are we just continuing to do things the way we've been doing them and not really valuing those perspectives, and changing the way that we talk about power dynamics and the way we talk about racial equity and racism and environmental injustice. And so moving forward, it's, I think it's really had a transformative impact on the way that we make decisions and think about who has power in our organization and who is our audience, and how do we want to be, how do we want to create assets and represent ourselves to our stakeholders. Zakia, would you like to add anything?
Sure. When this situation came up, I had a chance to look at all the emails and, Tyrone Hayes' correspondence with Syngenta. And for me, I kind of related. This was a person that was very frustrated and had a multi-million-dollar company attacking him. And so, this would have been is a perfect example of environmental, injustice, in that there's a Black man that's being pointed as the aggressor when basically he's trying to defend himself and his science. So when we were talking about, oh, he's controversial, yes, he had a couple of curse words in there. Yes, he had a couple of lyrics in there, but this idea that we're going to continue his villainization when we're supposed to be an organization that is about anti-racist work. I had to, double down saying, we have to include him. There's nothing controversial about him if we're really about this anti-racist work.
All right, so that kind of leads us to talking a little bit about our professional development. And we already kind of touched on this, but we really had to, as an organization, transform from this traditional lesson overview and lesson demo to spending time on that mindset preparation, the posture of how you're kind of arriving to this work, and really lean into, we have these teachers for 90 minutes, we have these teachers for 3 hours, whatever the time block is, how can we create intimate, authentic conversations that identify and address where the teachers are at and what work needs to be done, and really stress that it's crucial to take the time to learn, like Zakia already mentioned, you have to learn your community's history. You have to learn the spectrum of experiences within the students in your classroom and the importance of collaboration. And that this is an ongoing journey. So that the one thing that it's helped us really is that there's not some finite, here's your lesson plan. It's like you entering into our, yes, you can download the curriculum, you can download the curriculum and do what you want with it. But if you're coming to our workshops, we definitely want to impart that it is a journey, and with that it's an ongoing journey, and to have that kind of lens on when you're looking at the work, that there's no arrival point, it's just a continued journey, is really a helpful for identifying blind spots and continuing to do forward movement. And with that, I want to just share that we are in the midst of certain elements, and we really want to be transparent that we still don't have solutions for certain things, but we're in the process of dedicating time to that. So we wanted to even pull back the curtain to that, like currently what's going on in this PD experience. It kind of became really clear that there was a disproportionate impact on our BIPOC staff. So, being a majority white dominated space, like most historical environmental education settings, our attendance started to reflect the same thing. So the reality of who was showing up to the workshop was really not a diverse attendance. And so we started really evaluating our outreach. We started evaluating our attendance. We actually took a pause, when do we pull in our staffing? How can we, maybe ensure a more diverse attendee? So we're in the midst of this. This is a very current thing where we're taking a pause right now to really reevaluate what our outreach, what our attendance, and what our staffing looks like, so that we can really kind of alleviate a little bit of that impact on our BIPOC staff. Another example is a book club experience that Abby's going to share about.
Okay, we're running out of time, and I don't know how to tell this story quickly, but I'm going to try. So this is a very recent example, as recently as November. This is totally something I take responsibility for, but we had been, our equity working group had decided to read each month a different article or listen to a podcast related to race equity and discuss it. And sort of in my white brain wanting to be efficient and rush through things, I decided let's streamline this and pick a book, and we're going to have a book club on race equity, and everybody make your suggestions. And I didn't catch the red flags that only our white staff were making suggestions, and we just sort of moved through it without really stopping to ask, is this the right next step for our organization? And we sent everybody the books, and then I received some kind of very authentic feedback from staff of color about why this was problematic. And Vicki, I'm not going to try and paraphrase that. I'll let you share some of that perspective.
Sure. I didn't want to do the activity at all. I was not interested in a book club about that. And then by selecting the book that was selected, I really didn't want to read a book and then have a conversation about the struggles of being, some of the struggles of being a person of color in America. I don't have to read a book. I live it every day. So I was just not interested in that. And other folks, chimed in with similar viewpoints. So I know that we are at time. We want to leave some space for some questions. Did Kizzy or Abby, do you want to address anything else before we stop for questions?
I just really quickly want to mention that one important thing that has currently come up in realization of kind of what happened after the book club experience and monthly staff readings is that we, instead of sort of because many times diversity work can fall into a deficit focused, and we just really wanted to focus on upliftment and building connections. So we are right now really leading into celebrating diversity and leading with joy and identity sharing and kind of building bridges of connection and joyful celebration of each other. And that's like a pivotal point that we're at right now. I just wanted to highlight that as we kind of close up. And then Abby, I think there's a couple last words before we open up for questions.
I just wanted to emphasize the way that I was just going to share the community agreements, and we can put them in the chat maybe, but we, in the very beginning, when we invested in this professional development for our staff, we created these community agreements, and we have you can tell that the three of us and the entire organization have really leaned into giving direct feedback and living in discomfort and having uncomfortable conversations and having a posture of humility and learning. And it created this container that served us 3 years later and ongoing, where we can continue to confront these challenges and move forward. And just creating the container and having the space, it just paid dividends. And I can't emphasize enough taking the time at the beginning of a journey to really create those structures and tools and for the organization.
Well, I didn't mean to. I'm glad you put these in the chat. Thank you so much. I hope you've been looking at the chat because there's so much interest in what you all just laid out. And I cannot thank you enough. I wish we had more time, but really thanks for the honesty and talking about the challenges along the way and that you're still on this journey, because we're all on a journey, but really being able to look at your experiences and how it contributed to change in your organization, and also hopefully can help all of us with that change along the way. So thanks to all of you. I also wanted to thank Anne, and we do have Anne Umali, who's our Director of Professional Development. She'll say a few words at the very end. So Anne, we've got just a few minutes for questions. I know you've got one to kick us off, and we've got like 8 questions here, y'all. So Anne, you hit it first and we'll see how far we get.
Yeah, so many questions. You can really tell folks really appreciate this webinar. So thank you, all of you. One question I want to mention came up in registration, and this person is asking about storytelling. I know all of you have shared so many stories with us today. Can you say a little bit more about the importance of storytelling in the work that you do and the role storytelling plays?
Let me take that, Abby. Okay, great. Well, this is one example of that, right? So it's pretty crucial. We are, as human species, storytelling is deep as our DNA, and so many generations back, and that kind of oration is something that's sort of been lost to us. So this is a great example of how powerful storytelling is. And we really actually do workshops. As part of our workshop is supporting teachers to find, what is your story? You do have an entrance point, and it might not have been able to frame it in an earlier version of yourself because the terms or the jargon or whatever, you weren't in the sector, but there is a space. And how do you find that? And giving teachers and people their space to sort of identify what is the connection point that allows their students or whoever you're working with to feel that like personal connection. We also are just, we have a youth council, and we have a multi-part workshop series of those youth understanding how to use their voice, and how storytelling is one of the most powerful tools in shifting and collaborating and getting, organizing together and having people understand the shared thread, or being able to really just ignite compassion and empathy within each other. Instead of taking data and numbers, it really just humanizes things and makes it really tangible.
Well, you demonstrated that actually with this webinar. Sandra had a question about what did you do for resources in developing your interview questions, position descriptions? So many organizations are looking at updating their hiring practices. And another question came in about, how has your actual development work shifted as a result of this work in terms of how you raise money and how do you get the money to do professional development? So I kind of combine those two.
I wish I had the names of the different resources, and I wonder, Judy and Anne, if there's a place I can share them with you after. Actually, at that EE360 fellowship, I had a number of people just sharing all sorts of different resources, which I stored. So I'll share those after. In terms of development, we put it in the budget. We talked to funders about the importance of racial and environmental justice in this work, and we've in small increments sometimes or larger. We add it to the budget, to proposals that we submit. And, we have conversations with funders about how it's a priority for us, and exploring, is it a priority for them, and making sure that there's that alignment there. And then, we've made a commitment to sort of, for lack of a better word, spreading the wealth and making sure that some of the frontline organizations that are BIPOC led are getting some of the money that's being given at the national level that maybe they don't have the capacity to apply for a large federal grant, but making sure that we're passing along on opportunities or forming partnerships, so that we're kind of resource sharing at every level.
We'll take just two more quick questions. This is so great because we could all use all the experiences, but we can post on EE Pro, the Equity and Inclusion discussion group, and maybe try and answer some of the questions we can't get to. But Anne, do you want to take one more question and then we'll close out?
I have a question here from La Florence. La Florence is asking, how do teachers and community environmental advocates introduce some of these environmental justice themes? And how are they introducing it as equitable and just, and not seen as adversarial? And is that a challenge for you and your folks? You're all pointing to each other. Who gets to answer the question?
Kizzy, you go.
We can share. Well, so we, in our curriculum, we are mostly focused on formal and informal education settings, but it's not to say that there's not space for, adult facilitated, introductions, but we really are fans of just baseline shared knowledge, shared understanding. We all know, being in the sector, that jargon is just what it is. And you learn your terms and you learn your words, and sometimes simplified language is really the way to go to have more access to more people. But there's just some tenets, some really basic tenets. And I feel like, Anita, that was quite a robust question. But adversarial, it was to repeat the adversarial part versus the.
It was, how do you focus on it being equitable and just, and not just on the adversarial themes?
Yes. Well, so that we kind of like to tap into that beautiful kind of equation of really hard, frank truths in the history, and not, candy coating anything, and it's victories, and that there's always been resistance. and it's not been covered in history, but there's always been resistance. There's always been pushback. There's been victories. There's been, you know, milestones met. There's inspiration available. And so it's really a dance. We kind of bob it in and out of both.
And we do have questions from Michelle, Jeff, Laura, and Marissa that we will try to answer, which will be great. And I just want to say that the entire field of EE, I would say, really, this has been, how do we address systemic racism? And we just had such a good example of what an organization is doing to shift, and what does it mean to center equity in everything that we do. So thank you all so much. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Anne, who's going to close us out. But thank you all so much, EcoRise. We look forward to working with you, hearing about it more, and hope that everybody can learn more about your curriculum, and we'll answer the remaining questions online.
So many questions. Yes, we will get to as many as we can on our EE Pro site, but just wanted to close us out today and let everybody know that we'll be sending out the recording, the slides, and the notes as late, probably by the end of the day tomorrow. It'll go straight to your email, and it will also get posted on EE Pro to the same page you used to register for today's webinar. And while you're on EE Pro, I want to invite you to create a profile. You can create a free online profile with a bio, photos, you can connect to others, and you can connect to over 40,000 other environmental education friends that are already on EE Pro. So it is a great place to share resources, especially around the issues of equity and inclusion. So join us there. One resource I do want to mention, Judy mentioned that we have a huge a growing list of resources on our website addressing equity and inclusion. But one resource in particular that I want to mention is this Equitable and Inclusive EE online module. It is designed as an intro level online module. It is self-paced, entirely online, and you get a chance to hear different stories from people that are doing this work about why it's important and what it looks like in real life, and what do different EE programs look like. You get a chance to examine your own thinking, reflect on your own work, and really come up with your own mission for why to do equitable and inclusive EE. And it might be a good partner piece to the Preparing Your Mindset section of the EcoRise curriculum. And it's meant to be a really good first step for folks that are just dipping their toes into some of this work. So I invite you to check it out. It's all on our website on EE Pro. And lastly, we are doing a survey of all of our webinar participants. We really strive to bring you webinars that are the most relevant, most interesting for all of you. So help us out and let us know, what do you want to see? We are still lining up our webinar speakers for 2022. And we'd love to hear from you about what you want to see in this space. So let us know. It takes 5 minutes. I'm going to send the survey link to all of you along with the recording. And that is it. Really great to be with all of you. Thanks again, Abby, Kizzy, Zakia. We're going to continue this conversation online, because as you mentioned, this is ongoing work. This is a journey that we will be on for quite a while, and we would love to keep continuing the conversation and the learning with all of you. So thanks again for your time today, and we'll see you on another webinar very soon. Take care, everybody, and thanks again.
Thank you all. Great job. Excellent.
Take care, y'all.